Scared for reals.
Hey, it's Chris O'Neill.
This is Adam Perry.
Now, this is our first ever episode, and it's Halloween season, and we're coming upon the 137th birthday of Mr. William Henry Pratt, also known as Boris Karloff, and that is your favorite actor. Am I correct, Adam?
He is. Definitely in my top 5. At one point I would definitely call him my all-time favorite actors, but favorite horror actor, if we're talking horror genre, 100%. Boris Karloff, he is the GOAT.
The GOAT, huh? So what makes him the GOAT? Like you, you probably saw Frankenstein when you were younger, and you're like, oh my God, this guy is amazing. What a presence. But is that the first time you saw a Boris Karloff movie? What made you because I have my favorite actors, but you tell me all the time Boris Karloff is yours. So just tell me about what stood out when you watched a Boris Karloff film.
Well, I mean, if we're talking first exposure to Boris Karloff,
yeah.
I mean, as a kid, it had to be The Grinch.
Oh, The Grinch. Yeah, that's right.
The narration and the voice of The Grinch by Mr. Karloff. Then beyond that, I mean, it was Frankenstein that was my first time.
Yeah.
I had wonderful parents growing up in the early 90s, and this is how I kind of got into the whole horror genre to begin with.
Yep.
Is I had cousins who were going to see the big movie at the time, Scream.
Oh, yeah, 96.
And having the wonderful parents that I am, they were not going to let a 6-year-old go see Scream. But what they did instead, so I wouldn't feel left out because I wanted to see horror movies, scary movies, they would take me to Blockbuster Video, which was a thing at the time.
Right. Oh, yeah.
And we would rent Frankenstein. We would rent Dracula, The Mummy, The Wolfman. And I was hooked. Lifelong passion begins there. And the first one was Frankenstein. And as I got older and I began to study films, to study acting, to watch Karloff really make these roles unique and just incredible. Stuff that, again, we're going to try to stay away from Frankenstein in this episode.
Yeah.
Spoiler alert. We are going to drop a show on the 21st, which was the release date 92 years ago.
Yeah, 92 years.
Frankenstein, 1931. So we're going to talk all things Frankenstein on the 21st, including the sequels.
Yes.
But for today, just to focus on Karloff, I mean...
See, you and I grew up, you have a brother?
Yes.
Any other siblings?
Nope.
I have a younger sister. Boris Karloff was in a family of 9, I read. Like he was
the youngest of 9.
The youngest of 9. And somehow he had to stand out because, when you're the youngest, it's...
Yeah, well, not only was he the youngest of 9, he was a family that all went into public service.
Yeah, yeah.
So they were, in the English, civil service and civil servant. He broke away and was like, I'm doing this acting thing, and kind of really put some craw up his parents' butt when he decided to move to Canada and pursue this thing called acting.
Yeah, because he had to move overseas for that.
He did.
Yeah.
He joined some acting troops and traveled all over the North America,
right,
building his craft and working as a laborer, working as a truck driver until finally, he got his break in Hollywood at 41 years old.
Yeah.
80 movies later in Frankenstein.
Yeah, right.
But before Frank, he was on the cusp.
Yeah.
And we'll talk about one of your favorite movies, The Lost Patrol. But really, he was right there about to break when Frankenstein took over with Lost Patrol, The Criminal Code, and Scarface.
Yeah. Yeah, because... Yeah, we'll talk more about that, but 80 movies. Just imagine, the patience.
Silent movies.
Yeah, I know. He did silent movies. A lot of these famous actors, they had studio contracts back in the day. John Wayne had like 30, 40 movies before he was a star. A lot of them, Bela Lugosi, he was like a romantic leading man over in Hungary, Budapest, and all that kind of stuff.
Jesus Christ.
I know. I love seeing that image online.
Yeah.
But Karloff was like those guys. You know, it wasn't just like boom, you have your first role. And a lot of times, you know, the way the movies work today is it seems like a few movies and then they try to get their big break. But it took a long time back then, a longer time.
Sure, and to be fair, you know, movie making, the studio setup, way different.
Way different. There was really a studio system, and then it kind of broke in the late 60s. But
I mean, it was kind of monopolized. It was kind of, you know, I mean, which, again, another wonderful thing about Karloff, you know, Screen Actors Guild, he's card number 9.
Card number 9.
Card number 9, one of the original founders of the Screen Actors Guild. As we were talking, they are currently on strike.
Yeah.
You know, but he was the driving force, you know, I mean, because he was severely hurt on Frankenstein, which we'll get into in the Frankenstein episode, but he suffered a major back injury that really hurt him he suffered the rest of his life.
But it gave him his, because every actor kind of has a walk. And he kind of had like a little stride kind of thing. I'm trying to think of the right word for it, but he had a saunter. He had his traditional saunter. You see, it doesn't matter if he was in full disguise. That walk that he had, from Frankenstein forward. After that, he had a walk, and it was you know Denzel Washington has one, Russell Crowe has one, De Niro, all of them, but Karloff had a walk too. He
had a walk, and you could, you know, tell the guy really suffered in his life. You know, he got it in his performances, but just in his pain tolerance. Those makeups that Jack Pierce put him through were torturous. Frankenstein aside, 8 hours.
Yeah,
for the mummy.
Yeah,
and you don't even see a full shot of him.
No,
in the mummy get up. In the 1932 Mummy, but it was so iconic.
Yeah,
and then, you know, not only did he had 2 makeups to be done. You had the Imhotep mummy makeup, and then the Ardith Bey withered old. And I don't know if you know much about makeup effects. I know, you know, not much, but enough to know that back in the day there was no such thing as foam latex. There was no such thing as liquid latex. Basically, what you had was glue and cotton.
There was no computers back then.
There was no computers back then. And again, you know, I'm going to try not to keep referencing Frankenstein, but
it's hard not to.
When we're talking Karloff, but I mean, to think, and you know, it's Halloween.
Yeah.
All right. So to think that when you think of the Frankenstein monster, you think the flat head, the electrodes in the neck, the scar over the brow, the intruding brow.
Right.
That's Boris Karloff.
Right.
That was never, ever depicted in Mary Shelley's book.
No.
And the same thing with Dracula, even still with Bela Lugosi. The widow's peak, the pale face, the popped color, the medallion. Universal, and this is why Universal is my all-time favorite studio when it came to these movies. What would today be without that image of Frankenstein, that image of Dracula, the werewolf iconography?
Yeah.
You know, all created by Kurt Siodmak in Wolfman 1941.
Right.
So, I mean, being today is Halloween, you know, and to think that today, when you see a kid or an adult dressed as Frankenstein, whether it has the Universal license on it or not, we are looking at Boris Karloff.
Right.
The concept between him, James Whale, and Jack Pierce. That is in itself incredible.
Right.
And again, to think that they did this with cotton, collodine. Collodine, for those of you who don't know, is this wretched liquid plastic that, you know, you put on it has to be melted off your face.
Yeah. And it's not good for your skin or pores either.
Not at all. Spirit gum, again, it's basically it's sap from a tree. You paint on your face and then put cotton over it, and then you paint it up with grease paint. Right. You know, and every morning, you know, for Frankenstein, for the Mummy, to sit for hours and just, I mean, again, there was no latex or silicone molds to just glue onto Boris's head. This stuff had to be built from scratch every single morning, then taken off piece by piece every single night. I mean, there's legendary stories of people driving down the street and seeing Boris in full Frankenstein costume watering his garden.
Imagine that. Imagine that,
Well, when his only daughter Sarah was born, it was during Son of Frankenstein. He left the set in costume to go to the birth. Now, can you imagine the poor receptionist having to sit at the hospital door and see a Frankenstein monster come charging through the lobby? I mean,
yeah.
And then you get this soft-spoken lisp English gentleman talking through that, and wow,
Yeah, he's just so iconic. We were talking about it because this was like sound talking movies had only been around for about 3 or 4 years at that time. So, and he basically grunts. That's it. That's all he says. So it's basically a silent film performance. You and I were talking about it, and it's like just his presence. He doesn't overdo it. He's very natural, kind of like in the vein of Conrad Veidt, Lon Chaney. Those are the two silent film actors that stick out to me because of how natural they were.
Yeah, if you want to, kind of compare him to an actor of today's standard, when you talk about the natural acting, I think of like a Sam Neill.
Kind of. I kind of when I think of Karloff and the generation afterwards, Christopher Lee kind of comes to mind, where Christopher Lee was very natural and he did mainly B movies and cult films, just like Karloff. It seems like he was inspired by, the likes of Karloff and Vincent Price for sure. But it's just Christopher Lee had that similar kind of presence like Karloff. I mean, he was just so iconic. He literally stood there, and we were talking about screen presences. He's got one of the best up there with Seadow and also Christopher Lee, where they could just stand there. Their aura, they have an aura about them where you pay attention to them and what they're doing. And that was just so, even when Karloff had a supporting role, he stood out.
Yeah, he just ate up the screen.
Yeah.
We were talking before we hit the record button here. Very few actors at that time, if they were big enough, they were billed by their last name. And that alone drew you to the movie. And
like Charlie Chaplin was.
Again, you didn't see Charlie Chaplin in. It was just on a big market. Chaplin, Lon Chaney. It wasn't Lon Chaney in Phantom of the Opera. It was Chaney.
Yeah, Chaney is actually the first guy, and then when it comes to B and horror films, Chaney is the guy, and then you've Lugosi. Even Lugosi did not get his own because he kind of struggled.
Yeah, we could do a whole show on Lugosi. After Dracula, Lugosi,
it was kind of tough.
Yeah,
but Karloff,
after Frankenstein, it was Karloff,
right?
Karloff the Uncanny.
Yes,
and again, another fantastic movie. Old Dark House.
The
Old Dark House. What a fantastic, for you happy Halloween guys, want to watch a great Halloween movie? Old Dark House. But as you said, it's a total supporting role.
Yeah, but it's so unique. It was completely different from the Frankenstein monster. People watch that movie today, 91 years later, and they're like, oh my goodness, because he's like doing this gibberish kind of... Very weird, bizarre, but yet unique and compelling. You can't take your eyes off the screen. It's that incredible.
And it's a supporting part. So like he's only in maybe 15 minutes of the movie.
Yeah, but he's the one you remember the most.
And smartly, Universal, it's how they promoted him.
Right.
It was come see the Frankenstein monster, Karloff, and this, and like even on the posters, it would show a transformation from Frankenstein monster to Morgan.
Yeah.
And it was like, this is the same guy.
Right.
This is Lon Chaney 2.0. This is Karloff.
Right. But he somehow, I know there was a lot of comparisons when, with Chaney when he first came out, obviously.
Was there nothing else to compare him to?
I know. And he was inspired by it, obviously, like every actor was at that time, but he rose above it. And the funny thing is, I remember seeing, I don't remember what interview, it was near the end of his life, and they're just like, what you pretty much did were all B movies. Don't you wish you could have done other things? And he goes, I was perfectly happy. I had a great time. He loved it.
Right.
He relished, doing all of these like B movies, and it was just great to see.
Well, again, you think of where this guy came from. He struggled
Right.
until his 40s. He makes it big during the Great Depression.
Right.
So this
not
was
an
a
easy
man
task.
who was just happy to have steady work.
Right.
So when he was asked how he felt about typecast, to him, that was the greatest thing that could have ever happened to him.
Yeah.
Because he just had script after script. And
he could have easily said, I bought my first house. Like I've talked with many famous people, and they're like, yeah, I remember this song because, well, I bought my first house with it, but
Right.
he enjoyed it though. It was, yes, he made a lot of money, but you could tell with a smile that he thoroughly enjoyed every role.
Yeah, and I'm sure personally as an artist he wanted to do more, wanted to expand more. But I mean, later in his life he did get to do that with off-Broadway stuff like Arsenic and Old Lace.
Yes, which was again
he played Captain Hook in Peter Pan.
Yeah.
He was one of the first Hollywood actors to embrace television with Thriller and The Veil,
and of course The Grinch.
and again The Grinch. I mean. Again, what would Christmas be without
The Grinch?
The Grinch,
that iconic voice. He's one of the best voices.
Yeah, and that's what was it? 68, 67?
66.
66. Yeah. I mean, he dies in 69. So this is the end of the road for him, and he's still putting out a performance like no other. And again, it's a staple. You walk into Hobby Lobby, Michael's, Lowe's. The vintage, we don't see Jim Carrey's Grinch. We see Boris Karloff's Grinch everywhere.
Right.
I was in Lowe's the other day, and they have all their Christmas stuff out already.
Right.
And there's a 6-foot Karloff Grinch.
Yeah.
Animatronic.
So, well, I liked they did the Benedict Cumberbatch one that came out like 4 or 5 years ago. It was, the animation was similar to the 1966 one.
Sure.
So we while we're talking about favorite Boris Karloff movies, we're going to do our top 5. Why don't you start with your number 5?
My number 5. All right.
I know this is tough because we could pick probably like 10 apiece, but
and you know what, based on my mood, it will change.
Right.
I think the only thing that won't change is my 1 and 2.
Mm-hmm.
And so number 5, Karloff movie. I'm gonna go with The Lost Patrol.
Oh, yeah, that's a good one.
Pre-Frankenstein.
Yeah.
Karloff plays a soldier in World War I who just goes crazy.
Right. Well, he's kind of like a priest.
Yes.
And by the way, Lost Patrol is my number 3 because I to be honest, I when I discovered the Lost Patrol, I was on a John Ford kick, and John Ford is he is the director that started the cliches in pretty much every single movie, especially action, westerns, dramas. The cliches you see today are because of John Ford. Anyway, I digress. So what made you want to, did you seek out the Lost Patrol or did you happen upon it?
I seeked it out because, as I got older, I told you how I came into the movies, but as I got older, I became to obsess about, especially the Universal classics. Mm-hmm. So, as I'm researching and as I'm, looking into stuff, one movie out of many that kept frequently popping up was Lost Patrol. And, I had to go check it out. And wow.
Yeah, I know.
Wow.
I mean, the whole movie, and of course, Karloff, like I remember him specifically saying it was like 150 degrees on the set.
Yeah.
And it was so, but you watch that role and the critics were so unkind at that. Well, they are today to a certain degree. Now everyone's a critic.
Yep.
Where back then you had a set amount of critics. Not everyone could be a critic, because you couldn't post online. But the Lost Patrol, they really tore apart Karloff's performance. I wonder if that deterred him in any way, because like at that point, Frankenstein had come out. Mm-hmm. Scarface had come. I mean, this is 1934. The Lost Patrol came out, so almost 90 years ago.
Right.
And one, we don't. I don't know. I couldn't find any specifics digging around for research on the Lost Patrol. He must have been trying to do different things, because this is unlike anything he had ever done before or since. Mm-hmm. It didn't sound like him.
Right.
He really changed his voice, and I didn't detect the British accent. It might have been a little bit, but he definitely like stepped outside of a comfort zone,
right,
and did something completely different.
I mean, again, that could have, been the artist in him.
It could have been,
but that could also have been the starving artist in him.
Yes,
he was just at that time. Again, Lost Patrol was filmed before Frankenstein.
Yes, it was like 31, 32.
Yeah, so he did not make he had not made it yet. So, I mean, we're talking about a guy who's in his 40s now.
Right.
Taking anything and everything that comes his way.
Right.
When James Whale famously discovered Karloff in the Universal Commissary,
yeah,
he was in his costume for Scarface. He was dressed as a gangster.
I know.
And James Whale saw the Frankenstein monster in his face. I don't know if that's an insult or a compliment now.
Right.
But, the guy was just taking work as he could. I mean,
but imagine audiences though at that time, because yes, he filmed it before Frankenstein, but it came out afterwards.
Sure.
And you go to a movie because at the time John Ford was kind of hot. Victor McLaglen was kind of a star. He wasn't a big star. Mm-hmm. He did win an Oscar a few years later for another John Ford movie. And that's the thing. You and I were kind of going back and forth. One wonders what the relationship was like, John Ford and Boris Karloff. Yeah, studios traded out other artists because that's the way it was. Okay, well, we'll use him for a one-off. Mm-hmm. But it's like John Ford, even though he worked for the studio, he had a troupe of actors. He had a troupe of different technicians that he used every single movie. Mm-hmm. And it was interesting because Karloff never appeared in another John Ford film.
Sure.
It just, it's a mystery that, if Boris Karloff were in this room, I'd ask him, hey, just out of curiosity, why didn't you work with John Ford again? And a lot of people ask that, like Ray Liotta and Martin Scorsese. I think they tried to do one other movie together, but it maybe same thing. It never transpired.
Sure.
Who knows?
Well,
but it's a mystery because to me, Karloff, it was so amazing in the Lost Patrol, and he got critically panned at the time. It was over the top. It was zany. It was just unfortunate because if there was more good publicity for that role, mm-hmm. who knows what could have happened, because it was very early on after his big break. You know what I mean?
Yeah, but again, thinking of the studio structure at the time,
right.
He does this movie before Frankenstein.
Right.
His performance is criticized.
Right.
And who knows? Maybe John Ford wanted to work with him again.
Yeah, that's what I mean.
But by the time Frankenstein comes out, I mean, Universal latched on to Karloff. I mean, That was their meal ticket through the Depression.
Right.
That was their next Lon Chaney. So, I mean, maybe he wanted to work with Karloff again.
Right.
But he just couldn't. Or it was just too much to get him.
Right.
So.
Yeah, I know. It's just one of those fascinating what if scenarios, because
exactly.
what if Karloff was in The Informer,
mm-hmm.
A few years later, just as secondary role or the main car. I don't know. It's just one of those things that blows the mind. But anyways.
Yeah. No.
Anyways, the Lost Patrol, I kind of have that number 3. You had that at number 5.
Yeah. And before we get to your number 5, if I could just give 2 honorary mentions that didn't make the list.
No, go ahead.
I'm just going to throw out, Karloff did 2 movies in 32 when he was in the middle of a contract dispute with Universal. He went overseas and he went to England to do one, and then one with MGM. Mm-hmm. That was The Man They Couldn't Hang and The Ghoul.
The Ghoul.
I'm telling you, so freaking good. Again, these are two movies that will, depending on my mood, will jump into my top 5 list. But I had to mention them. They're, especially in The Man They Couldn't Hang. If you've never seen this movie, I recommend it to anybody who's a classic horror fan, a Karloff fan, or just if you just like movies from the 30s.
Right.
This movie was fantastic. But anyway, what is your number 5 Karloff movie?
Well, I again, like, I struggle with any list that has to do with movies. I kind of have 3 that are tied for the top 5.
Okay.
And they're all of the Val Lewton produced films: Bedlam, Isle of the Dead, and Body Snatcher. Just like a couple years, and Val Lewton. I remember Karloff saying that he was grateful for Val Lewton because at that time he was in a lull and he kind of stepping away from the genre, the horror genre, because of Frankenstein. He was kind of tired of it, and he came across these unique movies. And you take a look at the titles: Bedlam, Isle of the Dead, Body Snatcher. You immediately think these are horror films.
Yeah.
And it's kind of misleading because, I picked up the Val Lewton set because, well, I love cat people, and I Walked with a Zombie. But then I'm like, wow, Karloff, a few Karloff movies. And I'm like, oh, these are going to be good horror movies. I was deceived, but in a good way. It was like an eye-opener that Karloff did way more than horror movies. But it almost seems like, because at the time Karloff was known for his horror movies, they kind of, like, even though Val Lewton had his own style, it just seemed like the titles, Isle of the Dead, Body Snatcher, Bedlam. This is going to be like gruesome horror films, but they're actually amazing films in disguise of a B movie.
Sure.
I can't think of any other way to describe it. They're kind of B movies, but there's a lot going on beneath the surface. You know what I mean? And one wonders if, like, David Lynch and Bud Betticher, who famously did those Westerns, which are, these are just B movies, but there's so much going on. Very complex movies.
Yeah.
Bedlam is one of those, okay, he's a villain, but not really. Mm-hmm. Not really. He's trying to do what he's told. Mm-hmm. He's got to follow the chain of command in society. Mm-hmm. And so there's a lot of criticism there of society, the patriarchy, all that kind of stuff. And Isle of the Dead, you and I were talking, like, the first couple of minutes of that movie, he doesn't say a word.
Yeah. Again, we were talking pre-recording, and to anybody who's listening, if you want to really feel and know the power of Boris Karloff's presence in a movie, the first 2 minutes of Isle of the Dead, where he is ordering his top lieutenant to commit suicide.
Right.
All right. And then we find, once they do start dialogue, that not only is this his first in command, but a good friend of his.
Yes.
But he does this whole scene without saying a word.
Right.
And
you got to look carefully at his face.
The power of that scene, absolutely incredible.
Yeah.
Absolutely incredible. And you have to watch it to really understand it and feel it.
Right. And the cool thing about all of these movies, The Ghoul, all the ones you mentioned, and these Val Lewton movies, is the longest, I think, is like 80 minutes.
Yeah.
So it doesn't take a lot of investment, but the Val Lewton movies especially are very complex. The Isle of the Dead, you think, there's going to be zombies. No, it's dealing with the plague. Yeah, and it's the whole, and especially past few years, having to deal with staying in place, not touching anybody.
Sure.
So it's very relevant to today. Is it tyranny that he's doing this? He's doing it to help save lives. He actually cares, but in the end, they realize that. And I don't want to give away too much of the movie, but
again, that's isn't that Karloff's MO?
Yeah,
finding the pathos and the sympathy in the movie, because here he is, like, he looks like a monster,
right? Because
he is doing his job where he could have easily saved himself.
Yeah,
but
Bedlam is the same way.
But again, he's making the tough decision, and
right?
man, powerful stuff.
Yeah, good. I mean, this is good anti-hero stuff before the term anti-hero was invented.
Sure.
You know, it's like Bedlam is another one, you know, where you're just the guy, you don't like what he's doing.
Yeah.
But you understand he's doing what he's supposed to do because he has to appease his superiors. Mm-hmm. That's all he's doing. He's running this insane asylum to appease his superiors. And this one woman who's rocking the boat, trying to make life better for the insane, it's like, well, that's not what my superiors want. Mm-hmm. He can't say it that way, so he's got to do it the Boris Karloff way.
Sure.
Which intimidates, scares, you know. But Bedlam, Isle of the Dead, and especially Body Snatcher. Now, this is interesting.
Body Snatcher.
Well, yeah, that's the thing, because is he the body snatcher or is the doctor the body snatcher? That's the thing that I love that title, because it could easily be talking about Karloff's character, who is just this cab driver. Now, he's a likable guy. You see him at the beginning of Body Snatcher. One of the first scenes with Karloff is you see him like being very kind to this girl who can't walk.
Right.
You know, he's very gentle with her. Pet the horse. You've got a friend.
Yeah.
And he's very kind, but then you see the darker side, you know, but is he really a bad guy? No, he's not.
But it's also, they kind of leave it open for interpretation. There's definitely a very sinister side to Karloff.
He's very sinister.
Yeah.
Again, this is where the anti-hero comes into play. You definitely don't agree with what he's doing, but he's trying to survive. This is probably where some of his instincts as an early actor come into play, because he's doing this. He has this relationship with this esteemed doctor. The doctor is really trying to do good for humankind, but the way he's doing it is criminal. It's not right. But Karloff, and he knows that. Karloff knows this, but he's got to do it because he's got to survive. Because being a cab driver, even now,
sure,
you can't really just do that for a living unless you own it. Even then, it's kind of tough. But yeah, that's all he was. He was a cab driver, and he wanted to make some extra money, and that's how he did it. You know, digging up corpses and bringing it over to this doctor, so this doctor could find cures for all sorts of illnesses and diseases, and you know, help cripple people walk again. You know,
sure.
So I mean, for the 1940s to have movies like this, it was different.
Yeah,
it was different. Again, it was sold as a B movie, but there was a lot of artistic stuff going on under the surface that made it rise above the typical B movie stereotype.
And final collaboration between Karloff and Lugosi on film.
Yes, that's right. Yeah, Body Snatcher, and that's unfortunate, because Bela Lugosi was kind of cool. Again, it was, you know, it could have easily been a throwaway role, but Bela Lugosi made it more than that. But again, we could do a whole thing on Bela Lugosi,
and I'm sure we will at some point.
Yes,
because you know, you want to talk about controversy and stories. Lugosi has them.
But yeah, those three movies, Bedlam, Isle of the Dead, Body Snatcher, they're all kind of tied for 5.
For 5?
Yeah.
Okay.
So what's your number 4?
Number 4, Tower of London.
Oh, yeah. That's a good one.
Yeah. I mean, this is Karloff at his peak evil.
Mm.
And not only does he steal the movie,
yeah, he's a secondary part.
He is standing in the shadow of Vincent Price and Basil Rathbone.
Yeah, I know.
And he steals the show. I mean, what does that tell you?
But yeah, that's the thing. He's like third tier in that movie.
Yeah.
You know, you have Vincent Price, Basil Rathbone. Oh my God, he's so evil in that.
Oh, what a wonderful movie. A period piece.
Yeah. It's not a horror movie either.
No,
that's another one.
It sure isn't.
Yeah.
But again, you know, we've been talking about Karloff and his brilliance to find somewhere in the movie where he can generate that sympathy.
Right.
And throughout this movie, he is a bad mofo, you know, unforgiving executioner.
Yeah.
But then when he goes to pick up the child prince for his execution, and the look on his face when the child prince turns into him and hugs him.
Oh gosh, I know.
Oh man, it breaks you sees, Karloff, for a split second, his heart break.
Right.
And it's generated throughout the whole audience feels it.
Right.
Again, the brilliance.
The body language. It's the body language.
Something
Yes.
that probably every other actor would have not noticed.
Yeah.
But Karloff takes full advantage of.
Right.
And takes it to a higher level.
Yes. Yes. Yeah, but Boris Karloff, man, I tell you.
He could elevate what a normal actor or a general actor would see as just something to do and make it way more meaningful.
Right.
And trust me, we're going to get into that.
It's very subtle too
with Frankenstein.
It wasn't over the top. Like a lot, again, the Lost Patrol people think, oh, he's over the top and stuff like that. To me, he did it just right.
Yes.
He knew he had great instincts as an actor, and it showed. Like that scene in Tower of London is a great example.
Yes.
So again, mine, I kind of did like 3 for 5. So I skipped to number 3, The Lost Patrol. We already talked about that. What's your number 3?
My number 3.
I don't know. It's tough.
Yeah. I would have to either go with. All right, I'm going to give you 3 for my number 3.
Well, I picked 3 for 5. So.
Yeah, so my number 3, I'm either going to go Targets. I consider. I know it's not his final film.
It's but second too, I think, isn't it? Second or third.
He did like 2 or 3 movies after in Mexico that were just kind of, paycheck.
That was Peter Bogdanovich's first film.
Yeah, but I mean, I'll get into Targets in a second. But so Targets. Comedy of Horrors.
I haven't seen that one yet.
Watch that because he plays a dementia-ridden grandfather, and he is absolutely hilarious in it. So he's in this horror movie again. Peter Lorre, Basil Rathbone, Vincent Price, and then you got Karloff in there playing a role that you've never seen him before in.
Right, and
he's absolutely hysterical. And then, if for a third movie I've had, this one's a guilty pleasure, it's The Raven.
Oh,
1935 with the second pairing of him, third pairing of him and Bela Lugosi.
Yeah,
Lugosi playing the Edgar Allan Poe obsessed doctor. Yes.
That's a great little find too. It's a gem of a film.
Yeah, it is.
It really is.
And again, we go back to the sympathy here. Here's Karloff, an escaped murderer.
Right.
Looking just for a new life,
right,
and then totally manipulated by the evil Lugosi.
But he does come to his senses.
But and then he becomes the hero.
Yes, he's the hero.
Yes. So, so those are the Targets for a swan song for Mr. Karloff. Could you have asked for a better send off? He's playing a retired horror actor, which is exactly what he was at the time.
Yes.
And surrounded by this movie with this serial killer on the loose. Man. And he, again, from a wheelchair, this man still had it.
Right.
He commanded every moment he was on that, in front of that camera, on that screen. Just brilliant.
Right.
Brilliant to his last day.
Right. And you could tell, like, Peter Bogdanovich, the late Peter Bogdanovich, give him a shout out because the guy was obsessed with cinema history, and you could tell, he loved Boris Karloff. You could tell.
And they even used Roger Corman's The Terror.
Yes.
In the beginning of it, I mean, again, terrible movie, but for
it's a fun. One of those. I mean, that's a guilty pleasure.
It's a Roger Corman.
Yeah, it's a Roger Corman guilty pleasure. He had a lot of those.
He did, but again, that's one of those movies for film history nuts.
Yeah,
to see Boris Karloff and Jack Nicholson.
I know
on screen together.
Yeah,
not once but twice. Because after he does The Raven. Yeah. With Peter Lorre and Vincent Price, which also has Jack Nicholson in it. Yeah, I mean.
60 years ago. That's crazy.
Yeah. And again, everything that Karloff did, he owned.
Right.
And this is a time where the guy, would literally sitting in a wheelchair on oxygen, they'd say action, he'd take the oxygen mask off, get out of the wheelchair, do it to perfection, and then get back in his chair.
Right.
Oh,
it's incredible. It's incredible stuff. So number 2 for me, we're kind of. Do you want to do your number 2 first, or?
Well, I mean, my number 2. How can it not be The Grinch? I mean, How the Grinch Stole Christmas. I mean, it's
his voice.
His voice. It's just like, it's iconic. I mean, you hear it and you know it's what it is, and like you didn't even have to know who Boris Karloff was.
No,
and like I remember in 3rd grade, like we did a in class like mock play,
right,
where we went around and everybody had a section of How the Grinch Stole Christmas to read, and all you heard was Karloff's voice.
Right.
And when I read my section, that's what I heard.
Yeah.
I didn't even know who Boris Karloff was at the time.
Right.
I mean, it's so embedded in pop culture and in the Christmas season. And again, here he was late in life, probably his second most iconic role. You could even make an argument that How the Grinch Stole Christmas even tops Frankenstein.
Right.
In culture and impact and popularity. There's a wonderful documentary out that came last year on Karloff, and
it got a limited theatrical release.
Yeah, I think it was a Man-Made Monster, Boris Karloff, something like that.
Yeah.
But just imagine being his daughter. So he calls his daughter up, and he tells her, and she tells the story in the documentary. He goes, "I just did something, and I think it's good. Can you and the boys, his grandchildren, just have a look at it, tell me what you think?" And it's The Grinch. Could you imagine that? It's How the Grinch Stole Christmas.
Yeah.
I think I did something pretty well. Check it out. And you get handed The Grinch.
Well, to have that much confidence in it, too. Because a lot of actors are very insecure about themselves.
Sure.
And
with his lisp, the fact that he owned,
right,
the guy was fearless,
right,
I mean, and we can get his whole TV career, with Thriller. I mean, he one of the only actors at the time, Hollywood actors, to embrace television,
right, very few,
as an entertaining media, and he was also doing radio.
Yeah, a lot of radio plays. And that's the thing when it comes to like iconic voices. Everyone talks about Morgan Freeman. He's great.
Right.
But for me, Boris Karloff comes to mind, and Orson Welles. I mean, those two voices, back in that time frame, you wanted somebody to narrate something, you go to Karloff, you go to Welles, what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, they just had that
voice.
Yeah.
And Welles started off doing radio, but yeah, Karloff did radio too.
Karloff sang his own version of the Monster Mash.
Yes, he did.
And it's probably better than the Billy Pickett.
Bobby Boris. That's why Bobby Boris Pickett.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, Boris Karloff is just so iconic. My number 2, like Adam was saying earlier. By the way, Adam Perry and I'm Chris O'Neill. We're Scared for Reals here. This is our very first episode. We're talking about our favorite Boris Karloff films. Scarface is number 2 on the list.
Wow.
And, well, that's the thing. Like, we were talking about how we rate movies and 5 stars and everything. It's like Lost Patrol, Scarface, and Frankenstein, or the Bride of Frankenstein 2, get 5 stars each.
Sure.
And Scarface, even again, he was in a movie for like 10 minutes, maybe, if that.
Yeah.
But what an impression, bowling.
Bowling, and he snuffed out.
At least he was able to let go of the ball, But no, Scarface was just so iconic, and it was just ahead of its time. Another movie that's 91 years old, and just some of the themes in that movie were so controversial. This is the pre-code stuff, But Boris Karloff, made such an impression. And again, he never did another type of role like that.
Well, I mean, because the role right after is Frankenstein.
Yeah.
And,
well, I know, but it's fascinating to watch all of these movies. And some of them, Scarface was revered then, and it still is. But it's like these films like Lost Patrol and Scarface. It's just it just makes you wonder, what if those movies, they somehow praised him and he got more acclaim and he got different. it could have gone a whole different route for
Right.
him. Because he could have easily done all these other parts.
On top of, but you think of the other way. What if he didn't get the part?
Right.
If he doesn't get Scarface, he doesn't meet James Whale at the Universal Commissary,
Yeah.
and get the part of the Frankenstein monster. Again, we're gonna do a whole deep dive on Frankenstein,
Right.
But
it's unavoidable.
It's unavoidable with when you're talking Boris Karloff. But again, what if Bela Lugosi said, you know what, I'm gonna do the movie. I don't like it,
Right.
but I'm going to do them. If he had a little bit more of an attitude like Karloff did at the time,
because he was offered it first.
He was not only offered it, he was building it. He did a test screening.
Yeah.
Now, to be fair to Bela Lugosi, he was shown and presented an entirely different script, an entirely different movie.
True.
Than Boris
Yeah.
Karloff was.
Yeah.
However, it's when you're coming off of Dracula.
That's tough.
That's
and
that has some cojones to say, no, I'm not going to do the next giant horror movie
Right.
of a novelization of a movie.
You can't. Well, and that's the thing. No one, not even the filmmakers, can predict that these movies are going to be a huge success.
Well,
you can hope they are.
exactly.
You hope that's what every filmmaker, every actor hopes for, that they do something that's very successful. And you could tell, I don't think method acting was a thing, but Bela Lugosi got into Dracula.
Right.
And it was completely different from anything he'd ever done before, making Dracula kind of like a romantic kind of thing,
Sure. And again, we'll do a closer look at Bela Lugosi at a different time, but Karloff even said himself, he thinks Lugosi's biggest problem in America was that he could speak English, but he thought in Hungarian.
Yes.
I don't think he could learn the lines and speak them in English, but I don't think he really understood what he was talking about or the context in which
that could be true, because he couldn't. His English was not bad. It was actually pretty good considering.
Sure.
Karloff knew English, so
yeah,
it was easier for him.
exactly,
But one wonders if he actually knew some of the words. But he had another great voice too. But man, it's so iconic. To me, Scarface. Watching that and knowing that he filmed it before Frankenstein, even though it got released afterwards. It got they did it sometimes 7 or 8 movies a year.
Well,
it was they boom one after the other. They were contract players. That's what they did.
I mean, you think about it. Dracula opens February 14th, 1931, and then Frankenstein comes out November 21st, 1931. Frankenstein didn't start shooting until July.
Right.
And I mean, they pump these things out fast, and again, I'll go right at number one is Frankenstein.
Yeah.
To give that type of a movie in that short time frame, man, ambition.
Right.
And obviously, this was pre-Screen Actors Guild, so they had no problem telling their actors that they were going to work, 62 hours without sleep, and
Yeah, and a lot of them did, and it led to a lot of problems, like for Judy Garland and Mickey Rooney, all of them. But Frankenstein's easily my number one. It's like a no-brainer, and we're just talking about the quality of films, the quality of Frankenstein. His performance is on par with the filmmaking in that.
Again, a performance that, again, most actors looked at and said a stunt guy should just do this. I don't want to wear makeup.
Right.
Karloff takes it
to a whole new
level. He probably gives, in my opinion, the greatest silent film performance in a talking movie of all time.
It's hard to argue.
A couple, he had the grunts and stuff like that, but he
doesn't say a word.
He pantomimes the entire movie.
Right. It's all body language. Body language, facial expressions, and the grunts say a lot too.
Yeah. What else? Like you said, what else can you say about Frankenstein? We talked about it earlier because this is Halloween. Every kid out tonight trick or treating. dressed as Frankenstein. You're not dressing up as Frankenstein's monster from the Mary Shelley novel. You're dressing up as Boris Karloff from Universal's Pictures 1931 Frankenstein, and that's the bottom line.
Right.
You know, it's just so iconic. And when I had my store, the Monster Stash, and I always used to take kids who were looking at, because I had the Universal Trick or Treat studio masks.
Yeah.
And I had pictures of Karloff from The Mummy and Frankenstein all over. And I would educate the younger kids on how they did this. And to think, and really think about it, like perspective.
Yes.
This movie came out 92 years ago this November. All right. Think of how many plays, movies, TV miniseries, TV shows, comic books of Frankenstein that came out since then.
Yeah, figurines, pulp culture. Yeah.
But still, nothing tops that makeup.
No. That performance.
Performance, but just the image.
Right.
Nothing has come close. And again, the technology of makeup with silicone, foam latex, different paints, again.
And now computers.
And now, green dots on the face to do whatever you want.
Right.
But to this day, that has never been topped. Says so much for James Whale, Boris Karloff, and Jack Pierce. What a legacy. We're closing in on 100 years of Frankenstein. Mm-hmm. And that image is still the Frankenstein monster image.
Right.
Universally known.
Yes.
Wow.
Yeah, even kids who haven't seen it, they know that image.
Yeah. They know the image, they know and again, not only the face and the flat head, the black jacket, the black pants, the big boots, the walk.
Yeah, that iconic walk.
The walk, the grunts. Kids, that's Boris Karloff, 100%.
Right.
That's not written on a script and say, hey, do this for us. That was Boris Karloff doing what Boris Karloff did.
Yeah, it was such amazing instincts too. We're the walk, the physicality of all of his performances, and just the body expressions. Because acting is so much more than talking. It's expressing, and it was very, very hard. 137 years later, he's still definitely an iconic figure for sure.
100%. And again, Halloween, horror, and even Christmas would not be the same today without the legendary Boris Karloff.
Right. Any final thoughts about Boris Karloff?
Other than, if you're a film fan out there and you haven't explored his work, other than like the normal, obviously Frankenstein, the iconic Frankenstein, Bride of Frankenstein, Son of Frankenstein, The Mummy. If you haven't ventured outside those, really dive into his work. And
it's amazing that we give a shout out to a lot of the boutique labels, because Criterion, BFI, there's like two different versions of Targets that you can pick up on Blu-ray. Eureka Entertainment, if you have a region-free Blu-ray player, they released a lot of his, like The Ghoul was one of them. There's like a trio of Karloff films. There's 5 film sets that you can pick up that Universal has released several times on Blu-ray and DVD. And of course, the Universal Monsters collection. And and I think Kino just is going to be releasing the 60th anniversary edition of The Raven with.
Wow.
It's just, there's a lot of Karloff that you can pick up out there. Not necessarily through big online shopping chains. You have to go to the smaller boutique labels, and Diabolic DVD is a perfect place to pick up a lot of this stuff.
Yeah, and Amazon Prime. Yeah. With the Prime subscription, I think you can get
some of them.
Like Thriller and The Veil, his TV shows that he worked on and hosted.
Yeah.
And again, there's so much we didn't cover today. Again, we stuck to our top
200 something movies. Crazy.
Again, movies that I could easily slide into my top 5. The Invisible Ray.
Yeah. Which is, again, not a horror movie. It's a gangster film.
No, The Invisible Ray, that's a mad scientist movie.
I'm thinking
Black Key.
The Black Friday. That's
Black Friday, yes.
Yeah, Black Friday was a throwaway gangster role for Bela Lugosi, but
yeah. But
Invisible Ray, yeah, mad scientist, yeah, that's kind of kooky. I remember that.
Invisible Ray. Again, all the Corman movies, the Raven, the Terror, Comedy of Horrors. His 2 movies he did with Abbott and Costello.
Yeah, that's right.
I mean, the Abbott and Costello meet the killers Boris Karloff, and Abbott and Costello meet Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. I mean, I almost like Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde almost as much as I like Abbott and Costello meet Frankenstein. Mm-hmm. Wonderful movies, and again, killer performances by Karloff every single time.
Yes.
I mean, again, for him to go toe to toe with Abbott and Costello and hold his own.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, he had a good sense of humor. He did comedy. He did drama. He did horror. He did all sorts of genres. Yeah, horror was the one that made him famous and iconic to this day. But check out, I mean, again, the Val Lewton films. You really need to do yourself a favor. Again, Bedlam, Isle of the Dead, Body Snatcher sound like horror movies, but they're so much more than it. It sells itself short if you think of these as B movies, because they're above that. It's incredible films. But yeah, we could go on and on about Boris Karloff. But yeah, you can find all of these. I'm a physical media guy myself, so you can actually get all the Val Lewton movies on Blu-ray or DVD. Top quality stuff. You can't go wrong.
Absolutely. So wrapping this up, first episode of Scared for Reals. I hope everybody enjoyed what they just listened to. We love doing this. This is going to be a fun project for both of us to be continue working on. So happy Halloween, everybody.
Yeah.
First and foremost,
right.
For Horror Nuts, this is our Christmas. Mm-hmm. So now as we transition into the month of November, our theme is going to be movies that came out in November.
Yes.
So obviously we've already teased you that on the 21st, we're doing 92 Years of Frankenstein.
Yeah.
Which, again, as a Karloff guy, I'm super excited about. But what's next, Chris?
As a matter of fact, we're going to dissect both versions of Dawn of the Dead. Well, actually, all 5 versions, because there's 3 cuts of the 1978, and then there's 2 cuts of 2004. So we're going to have fun.
Zombie fans, gore fans, here we go. Scared to Reels, episode 2, all things Dawn of the Dead.
Yeah, and you can keep track of us. You can find Scared for Reels on Facebook. We're going to open up a Facebook page so you can drop us a message and leave a comment here wherever you're hearing us, most likely on YouTube for right now. But yeah, thank you so much, Scared for Reels. Again,
let us subscribe.
Yeah, comment, like, subscribe. Tell us your favorite Boris Karloff movies. We talked for an hour about Boris Karloff. We want to know what your favorite Boris Karloff films. If you want to drop your top 5 below in the comments, we'd love to see what your favorite Boris Karloff movies are. Thank you so much, Scared for Reels. I'm Chris O'Neill.
I'm Adam Perry, your Maestro of the Macabre.
We'll see you next time on Scared for Reels.